God, I wish I'd never been born, said the elderly woman, a slave to her own children, but the rancher's unexpected action changed everything. Leave a comment saying what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10, and let me know which city you're watching from. I really want to know if you like my story and get to know you better, so please subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The sun rose lazily over the green fields of Green Valley as Eleanor Santos stood up from the narrow bed in the small back room of the Carter estate. At 66, her body ached, as if it carried the weight of every disappointment life had thrown at her. 3 years had passed since she had agreed to work as a housekeeper on the luxurious property, lying about her real age to get the job that would save her from destitution. Her calloused hands trembled as she prepared breakfast in the main house's large kitchen. Every movement was calculated, every step measured to avoid making noise and awakening the wrath of Stella, the strict manager who oversaw the domestic work. Eleanor whispered a small prayer, asking for strength to face another day of hard labor that her bones could no longer easily endure. Outside, mounted on his white horse named Thunder, Ben Carter watched the morning activity on his property. At 35, he had inherited not only the agribusiness, but also the responsibility of caring for dozens of employees when his father unexpectedly left for overseas 2 years earlier. His youthful appearance contrasted with the weight of responsibility he carried on his broad shoulders, always wearing a plaid shirt, leather vest, and a rancher's hat. Ben had noticed for weeks that something was wrong with the lady working in the main house. Eleanor arrived earlier and left later each day, as if she feared losing the job that was her only source of livelihood. He had grown up hearing stories from his paternal grandmother, a strong woman who had raised him alone after losing her parents as a child, and there was something in Eleanor's stooped posture that awakened a protective instinct in him. That Tuesday morning, as Eleanor scrubbed the marble floor of the main living room, her legs began to tremble. The pressure in her chest grew with each movement, but she couldn't stop. Her 3 children depended on the money she sent faithfully every month, even if they never showed any gratitude. Walter, the eldest at 45, always found an excuse to ask for extra money. Rose, 42, pretended to be concerned only when she needed financial help. Jeffrey, the youngest at 38, had simply disappeared after selling the house where she lived in the center of town. The dizziness came suddenly. Eleanor tried to lean on the coffee table, but her strength failed completely. The bucket of water tipped over, spilling water and soap across the freshly cleaned floor as she collapsed unconscious onto the cold tile. It was Ben who found her minutes later when he entered the house to get some documents. The sight of the elderly woman lying on the floor paralyzed him for a moment before the instinct to help took over. He knelt beside her, checking her breathing and gently calling her name. "Miss Eleanor, can you hear me?" When she slowly opened her eyes, the confusion and fear were evident. Eleanor tried to get up quickly, muttering apologies for the mess she had made, but Ben gently stopped her. "Calm down, Miss Eleanor. You need to rest. I'm going to call Dr. Harrison." "No, please, Mr. Ben," she pleaded with a weak voice. "No need for a doctor. I'm fine now. I just tripped." But Ben had already made his decision. He carefully carried her to the living room sofa and called the family doctor, ignoring the protests of the employee who feared being fired over the incident. During the consultation, Dr. Harrison revealed that Eleanor was showing signs of severe exhaustion and malnutrition. Her blood pressure was dangerously high, and he recommended immediate rest and regular medical follow-up. "She needs special care," the doctor explained to Ben in private. "Her body is showing signs of being overloaded. How many hours a day does she work?" Ben realized he didn't know the answer. He had never paid real attention to the working conditions of the domestic staff, trusting Stella's management. That discovery bothered him deeply. That afternoon, he decided to talk to Eleanor while she rested in the guest room, where he had insisted she stay until she recovered. The woman was clearly uncomfortable with the special treatment, fearing reprisals. "Miss Eleanor, I need to know the truth about your situation," Ben said, pulling a chair close to the bed. "The doctor said you're working beyond your limits." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears she tried to hide. After years of being treated as a burden by her own children, she couldn't believe someone genuinely cared about her well-being. "I have to work, Mr. Ben. I have nowhere to go," she confessed in a trembling voice. "My children. They sold my house when I was in the hospital with pneumonia last year. They said it was to pay my medical debts, but I found out they kept the money." The revelation shocked Ben. He knew about cases of elder abandonment, but he had never imagined it was happening right under his nose. The image of his own grandmother, who had always treated him with unconditional love, came to mind. "And you don't receive a pension?" "I do, but they take it all," Eleanor admitted, finally releasing the tears she had held back for so long. "They say it's to support me, but I never see a dime of the money. That's why I lied about my age to get this job. It was my only chance." Ben felt indignation rise in his chest. How could children treat their own mother that way? He got up and walked to the window, looking out at the fields that stretched to the horizon. "Miss Eleanor, from today on, things are going to change around here," he declared, turning to face her with determination. "You will only work part-time with light duties, and I'm going to increase your salary." "I can't accept charity, Mr. Ben," she protested, trying to get out of bed. "I've always worked honestly for my living." "It's not charity, it's justice," he replied firmly, "and I'm going to find out what really happened to your house and your pension." Eleanor looked at the young rancher with a mixture of disbelief and hope she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, someone was treating her with dignity and respect. It was as if a light had begun to shine at the end of a very dark tunnel. But what she didn't know was that her decision to trust Ben would trigger a series of events that would bring long-buried secrets to light and threaten to destroy the fragile stability she had built over those 3 years. Outside, thunder neighed impatiently, as if sensing the great changes were coming to the Carter Ranch. 3 weeks after she fainted, Eleanor still couldn't believe the change in her routine. Ben had kept his word, drastically reducing her workload and increasing her salary. For the first time in years, she could finish her tasks without feeling like her body was being torn apart. However, guilt consumed her daily, especially when she received constant calls from her children complaining about the reduction in the money she sent monthly. That Thursday morning, Walter showed up at the ranch unannounced. At 45, he had the look of someone who had wasted every opportunity in life. His ventures as a real estate agent had failed one after another, always due to his laziness and lack of responsibility. Dressed in ill-fitting suits and driving an old car he pretended was better than it was, he cultivated an image of success that deceived only himself. "Mum, you need to stop this nonsense," he said sharply, when he found Eleanor resting on the main house's terrace during her break. "People in town are saying you're playing the victim to get privileges from the rich boss." Eleanor felt her blood run cold. She'd spent her entire life worried about her family's reputation, and the idea of being the subject of gossip terrified her. "Walter, it's not like that. I felt sick and Mr. Ben just—" "I don't want to hear excuses," he interrupted, sitting next to her with his face red with anger. "You're being ungrateful to your own children. Rose is having trouble at work and needs money for a lawyer. Jeffrey has disappeared again and is probably in some trouble. And you're here playing princess." The eldest son's words hit Eleanor like physical blows. She had dedicated her entire life to those 3 children, sacrificing her own happiness and well-being. She had worked double shifts when they were young, sold her few pieces of jewelry to pay for their education, and had never received a genuine show of love in return. At that moment, Ben appeared on the terrace. He had just returned from the fields and immediately noticed the tension in the air. Eleanor's slumped posture and the aggressive expression of the unknown man told him everything he needed to know. "Good morning," Ben greeted politely, but his tone made it clear he had noticed his employee's discomfort. "You are?" "Walter Santos, Eleanor's son," he replied with a fake smile, standing up and extending his hand. "I came to get my mother for a family talk." "Nice to meet you," Ben said, shaking the offered hand, but remaining in a protective stance near Eleanor. "Ms. Eleanor always speaks of her children with great affection." Walter immediately realized that the young rancher would not be easily manipulated. He changed his strategy, adopting a more conciliatory tone. "Yes, our mother has always been very hard-working, but we're worried because she's getting older. You know how it is. Sometimes she can be a bother to her employer." "On the contrary," Ben replied firmly, "Ms. Eleanor is one of the most dedicated employees I've ever had, and she is under my medical care on professional recommendation." The mention of medical care made Walter frown. If his mother was receiving medical treatment paid for by her boss, that meant less money coming out of her pocket, and consequently, less money for him. After a few minutes of tense conversation, Walter said goodbye, but not before whispering a veiled threat in his mother's ear. "You're going to have to choose between your children and this stranger. And remember who took care of you your whole life." Eleanor was visibly shaken after her son's departure. Ben noticed her hands trembling and decided it was time for a deeper conversation. "Ms. Eleanor, can I ask you a personal question?" he said, sitting in the chair Walter had occupied. She nodded shyly, still processing her son's harsh words. "Do you really want to keep sending them money every month?" The question caught Eleanor off guard. No one had ever questioned her obligation to support her adult children. It was something she did automatically, like breathing. "They are my children," she answered defensively. "A mother never abandons her children no matter what." "But what about when the children abandon the mother?" Ben asked gently. Eleanor was silent for a long moment. Her memories went back to the day she woke up in the hospital after pneumonia and discovered her house had been sold. Her children had shown up with ready-made documents, explaining it was for her own good. She had signed the papers while still confused from the medication, trusting them completely. "I had a daughter," she said suddenly, surprising Ben. "My little Annie. She died at 4 from pneumonia, 40 years ago. I didn't have money for a private doctor, and the public clinic was overcrowded." Tears began to stream down Eleanor's wrinkled face. It was the first time she had spoken about Annie to anyone in years. "After she was gone, I promised myself I would never let my other children lack for anything. I worked 3 jobs for years. I sold everything of value. I did anything to give them the life I couldn't give her." Ben felt a tightness in his chest. Eleanor's story echoed his own experience of loss. Although he had lost his parents, not a daughter, but the pain of grief and the need to honor the memory of those who had passed were feelings he knew well. "You were a wonderful mother to Annie for the 4 years you had together," he said softly. "And I'm sure she wouldn't want to see you suffering now because of children who don't recognize your worth." In that moment, Eleanor saw in Ben something she hadn't found in her own children for decades: genuine understanding and selfless care. It was as if Annie had sent an angel to protect her in her most vulnerable years. "Mr. Ben, have you had children?" she asked, curious about the personal life of the young man who treated her with such kindness. "No," he replied, looking toward the horizon. "I lost my wife 2 years ago in an accident. Anna and I planned to have children, but fate decided otherwise." Eleanor felt her maternal heart expand. Here was a good and honest young man, alone in the world just like her. Without thinking, she reached out and gently touched his hand. "Anna was a beautiful name," she said, "similar to my Annie's." Ben smiled sadly. She would have liked you, Miss Eleanor. Anna always said I needed to learn to take care of people, not just business. That afternoon, when Eleanor returned to her room, she found a surprise that would change everything. A letter had arrived from Rose, her middle child, but it wasn't an ordinary letter. It was a court summons. Rose, who worked at the local city hall, was being accused of corruption for accepting bribes in public tenders, and she wanted her mother to sell any assets she owned to pay for her legal defense. The discovery that her daughter was involved in illegal activities was the final blow Eleanor had not expected. For the first time in 40 years, she allowed herself to question whether she had failed completely as a mother, raising children who had neither character nor compassion. Meanwhile, outside, Ben rode through the fields on Thunder, his mind processing everything he had discovered about Eleanor's family. A decision was taking shape in his mind, a decision that would risk his own peace but could restore dignity to a woman who deserved so much more than life had given her. The following week brought changes Eleanor could never have imagined. Ben had discreetly hired a private investigator to look into the sale of the house and find out more details about his employees' children's affairs. What he discovered left him deeply disturbed and determined to act. On Monday morning, as Eleanor was preparing coffee in the kitchen, Ben walked in with a folder of documents in his hands and a grave expression on his face. "Ms. Eleanor, I need to talk to you about something very important," he said, pulling up a chair and sitting at the kitchen table. His serious tone made her immediately stop what she was doing and sit down as well, her hands trembling slightly with anxiety. "Did you find out something about my children?" she asked, already dreading the answer. Ben opened the folder and took out several documents. "Ms. Eleanor, your house was sold for only $40,000 when its real value was at least $120,000. The buyer was a middleman who resold the property in the same month for $110,000. Eleanor felt the world spin. She knew the house was worth more than her children had said, but she never imagined the difference was so absurd. "There's more," Ben continued, hesitating before revealing the most painful discovery. "The middleman who bought your house is named Chris Carter. He's my cousin." The silence that followed was deafening. Eleanor looked at Ben with a mixture of shock and confusion, trying to process the information that his family was involved in the fraud that had left her homeless. "I didn't know anything about this, Ms. Eleanor," he said quickly, seeing the horror in her eyes. "Chris has always been trouble, but I never imagined he was involved in something like this. He lives in Richmond, and we rarely keep in touch." "Did your children know he was your cousin?" Eleanor asked in a strangled voice. "From what the investigator found out, yes. Walter had researched my family before approaching Chris. They knew exactly what they were doing." Eleanor staggered to her feet and leaned against the kitchen sink. The revelation that her own children had meticulously planned her ruin, even using information about her future employer's family, was too devastating to process. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, tears beginning to fall. "Now I can't work here anymore. How can I look at you knowing your family helped rob me?" Ben stood up and approached her, but kept a respectful distance. "Because I'm going to undo this injustice. I'm going to buy your house back and return it to you." "No," Eleanor exclaimed with more force than she intended. "I can't accept that. You've already done too much by helping me with the doctor and changing my work routine. Ms. Eleanor, it's not charity, it's restitution. My family contributed to your suffering, even if unknowingly. It's my duty to fix this." Eleanor shook her head vigorously. Her entire life had been marked by independence and dignity in her work. The idea of accepting a house as a gift, even if it was originally hers, went against everything she believed in. At that moment, the kitchen phone rang. It was Rose, the middle child, calling in desperation. "Mom, you need to come to town right now," she said between sobs. "Jeffrey has been arrested." Eleanor's heart nearly stopped. Arrested? For what? Document forgery. It seems he was involved in a scheme selling land that didn't exist. Some people lost their life savings. They're saying they could sue our whole family. Eleanor looked at Ben, who had overheard the conversation and was pale. If Jeffrey was involved in rural document forgery, it could affect farms in the region, including the Carter Ranch itself. "Mum, you have to get money for a good lawyer," Rose continued. "Otherwise, Jeffrey will be in prison for years, and if they find out we knew anything, we'll all go to jail together." "I don't have that kind of money, Rose," Eleanor replied, feeling trapped between loyalty to her children and the reality of her limitations. "Then sell something, borrow money. Talk to your rich boss, anything," Rose shouted before hanging up. Eleanor collapsed into the chair, the weight of 40 years of sacrifices for her children crushing her fragile shoulders. Ben realized she was panicking and knelt beside her chair. "Miss Eleanor, take a deep breath. We'll solve this together." "I can't involve you in my family's problems," she said through tears. "I've already caused enough trouble. It's better if I leave the ranch before this affects your business." "You're not going anywhere," Ben said firmly. "And I'll help with the lawyer for Jeffrey too." "Why?" she asked, looking at him through her tears. "Why do you care so much about an old woman like me?" Ben was silent for a moment before answering. "Because when I lost my grandmother, I promised myself I would always take care of the elderly who crossed my path. She taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about who stands by you in the tough times." That afternoon, Ben accompanied Eleanor to the city to meet Rose and Walter. The two siblings were in a cheap lawyer's office, desperately arguing about how to raise money for Jeffrey's defense. When they saw Ben walk in with their mother, they both became visibly uncomfortable. Walter tried to take control of the situation, as he always did. "Mr. Ben, thank you for bringing our mother, but this is a family matter," he said, trying to dismiss the young rancher. "Anything that affects Miss Eleanor concerns me," Ben replied calmly. "And forgery of rural documents can affect properties throughout the region." Rose, a plump 42-year-old woman with a face marked by bitterness, looked at her mother with ill-disguised contempt. "Mom, did you tell him our problems? What a disgrace. Now the whole town will know our brother is a criminal." "I didn't tell him anything," Eleanor defended herself shyly. "The phone rang and—" "Always making excuses," Rose interrupted cruelly. "You can't even keep your mouth shut." The way Rose spoke to her mother made Ben clench his fists. He had never witnessed such disrespect from children towards a mother, especially a woman who had clearly sacrificed her life for them. "I believe you're speaking to Miss Eleanor the wrong way," he said, his voice low but filled with authority. Walter sensed the tension and tried to change the subject. "Look, Mr. Ben, we appreciate your concern, but we need to handle this as a family. Maybe it's better if our mother comes home with us until this mess blows over." "That's not her home anymore," Ben reminded him dryly. "You sold it." The awkward silence that followed was broken when the lawyer entered the room with even worse news. Jeffrey's scheme was bigger than they had imagined, and several families in the region had lost money, believing they were buying legitimate plots of land. Worse still, some of these lands were environmentally protected areas, which made the case even more serious. "The young man is going to need a very expensive defense," the lawyer explained. "And even then, the chances of him avoiding a conviction are slim. There are a lot of wronged people wanting justice." At that moment, Eleanor made a decision that would change everything. She stood up slowly, looked at her two children present, and said with a voice they had never heard before, "You sold my house, you took my pension, and now you want me to ruin the life of another good person because of the crimes you've committed. I won't do it." "Mum, you're talking nonsense," Walter said, trying to intimidate her as he always did. But this time, Eleanor didn't back down. With Ben by her side, she had finally found the courage to face decades of manipulation and emotional abuse. Jeffrey can deal with the consequences of his own actions. I will no longer sacrifice myself for children who treat me like trash. The explosion of anger that followed from Walter and Rose was immediate and cruel, but Eleanor had already left the office arm in arm with Ben, leaving behind not only her ungrateful children, but also 40 years of guilt and unnecessary self-sacrifice. What she didn't know was that the next day, a discovery would completely change the understanding of the entire situation. The next morning, Eleanor woke up with a strange feeling in her chest. For the first time in decades, she had slept without the weight of guilt crushing her dreams. The decision to confront her children at the lawyer's office had released something inside her that had been trapped for a long time. Looking out her bedroom window, she saw Ben in the pasture training a young colt, his patience and kindness evident even with the animals. Around 10 in the morning, an official van pulled up at the ranch entrance. 2 men in suits got out and headed for the main house. They were employees from the Green Valley County Records Office, bringing documents that would change everything. "Mr. Ben Carter?" asked the older of the two. "We're from the Central Records Office. We found some irregularities in the region's property records that might interest you." Ben received them in the living room, calling Eleanor to join the conversation. She arrived wiping her hands on her apron, still shy in the presence of authorities. "Gentlemen, how can I help you?" Ben asked, gesturing for them to sit in the armchairs. The older employee opened a folder and pulled out several documents yellowed with age. "During our investigation into the documents forged by Jeffrey Santos, we came across some very interesting old records, specifically about a property that belonged to the Santos family for over 40 years. Eleanor's heart began to race. The employee continued to flip through the papers until he found what he was looking for. "Ms. Eleanor, the house your children sold was not just your residence. According to the original records from 1982, it was built on a plot of land that was part of a larger property you inherited from your parents. But there's an interesting detail." He handed a document to Eleanor, who took it with trembling hands. "This land shares a direct border with the Carter Ranch, and according to this old map, there is a water spring that originates on your land and crosses Mr. Ben's entire property." Ben leaned over to examine the document. The revelation was surprising. For all these years, part of the water that irrigated his ranch came from a spring that technically belonged to Eleanor's family. "This means," the official continued, "that the sale of Ms. Santos's property was irregular, not only because of the price, but because it didn't consider the water rights that come with the land. Rights that are worth much more than the house itself." "How much more?" Ben asked, already suspecting the answer. "According to the Water Resources Department's calculations, approximately $300,000. Maybe more, considering the value of water in the region." Eleanor nearly fainted upon hearing the number. Her small property was worth more than 10 times what she had received for it. Ben stood up and began pacing the room, processing the legal implications of the discovery. "There's more," said the second official, who had remained silent until then. "We also found the original birth and death records of the Santos family." "Eleanor, about your daughter Annie." The name made Eleanor freeze completely. 40 years later, it was still too painful to hear someone talk about her lost little girl. Hospital records show that she did not die of pneumonia as the certificate states. She was transferred to a private hospital in Richmond in critical condition, and there she made a full recovery. But no contact was made with the family after that. The silence in the room was absolute. Eleanor stared at the official as if he were speaking a foreign language. "This means," he continued gently, "that there's a good chance your daughter is alive. The records show she was adopted by a wealthy family from Richmond who paid all the medical expenses and then lost contact with Green Valley. Eleanor began to tremble violently. Ben knelt beside her chair and held her hands. The adoptive family's name, the official said, consulting his papers, was Carter. Ben felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. Carter? Yes, Dr. Anthony Carter and his wife Regina. They lived in Richmond for many years before moving to the countryside. They adopted a 4-year-old girl in 1983, whose name they changed to Anna Carter. The world stopped for Ben. Anna, his late wife, the woman he had loved and lost in a car accident 2 years ago, the woman who always spoke fondly of her vague memories of a mother who sang to her when she was little. "Ben," Eleanor whispered, noticing he had gone completely pale. "What is it?" With tears in his eyes, Ben looked at the woman who had become like a mother to him and said in a choked voice, "Eleanor, Anna was my wife. Your little Annie grew up, became a veterinarian, and came to live here in Green Valley with me 5 years ago." The revelation hit Eleanor like a lightning bolt. Her lost daughter had not only survived, but had lived in the same town as her for 5 years, married to the man who now protected her like a son. Did she talk about me?" Eleanor asked through tears. "Always," Ben replied, crying as well. She said she had fragmented memories of a mother who loved her very much, who sang a song about free birds. She spent years looking for that mother, but the adoption records were sealed. The records office employees, moved by the discovery, handed all the documents to Ben and discreetly left, leaving the two alone to process the magnitude of what they had discovered. In the following weeks, Ben helped Eleanor legally reclaim her property and the rights to the spring. The value of the water rights was more than enough to make her financially independent for the rest of her life. But more important than the money was the discovery that her daughter had lived a happy and full life. Walter, Rose, and Jeffrey learned of the discovery through lawyers. The shock of finding out they had sold a property worth a fortune for a pittance left them devastated, but it also revealed their true character. Instead of rejoicing at the discovery of their lost sister, they tried to sue Ben and Eleanor to get part of the inheritance. The lawsuit was quickly dismissed by the courts, and the 3 children permanently distanced themselves from their mother, showing they had never truly cared for her as a person. During Green Valley's traditional winter festival, Ben organized a special ceremony at the site of Eleanor's old house. There, he had built a small memorial to Anna, with a fountain that flowed from the spring that had always connected their properties. "Anna always said she felt a special connection to this land," Ben said, holding Eleanor's hand as they watched the crystal-clear water flow. "Now I understand why." Eleanor, now 67, had completely transformed. The weight of years of emotional abuse had been replaced by recovered dignity and the love of a son that fate had unexpectedly returned to her. She shared her new fortune with local institutions that cared for the elderly and abandoned children, honoring the memory of the daughter she had always believed to be dead. Ben sold his part of the ranch and moved to Eleanor's restored property, where they built a new house that was both a home and a symbol of a new beginning. There she cared for him, as she had always dreamed of caring for Annie, and he protected and respected her as the mother he never had the chance to know. On quiet Green Valley nights, sitting on the porch of the new house, Eleanor would sing the old songs that Annie used to hear, and Ben would listen with a full heart, knowing that love never truly dies. It just finds new ways to manifest itself through time and the right people. The farm prospered under their shared management, becoming known in the region not only for the quality of its products, but for the respectful way it treated its employees. Eleanor had finally found the family she had always deserved, and Ben had discovered that sometimes what we search for our whole lives is right in front of our eyes, just waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.